$668 million. That's how much ACDC has earned from touring alone. In 1975, Malcolm and Angus Young were broke. They could barely buy equipment despite signing with Atlantic Records. Their manager worked them to the bone while their money vanished into other people's pockets. The music industry isn't built for artists to win. It's designed for companies to take the most while giving back the least. Yet somehow, ACDC flipped this system upside down. They went from financial victims to business titans. Their journey holds lessons that go far beyond music. But behind the scenes, the fight for control had only just begun. A fight that would cost them their singer, nearly destroy their career, and ultimately forge the most resilient band in rock history. Picture this: a sterile boardroom at Atlantic Records headquarters, 1976. The smell of coffee and cigarettes hangs in the air as executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. ACDC had just released Let There Be Rock, but their raw sound was about to cost them everything. The executives' faces soured as Angus Young's blistering guitar blasted through the speakers. According to Phil Carson, who had signed the band to Atlantic, the A&R department declared, "We're sorry, but this album actually doesn't make it. We're not going to put it out and we're dropping the band." The suits had decided ACDC was too unpolished for American audiences. In that critical moment, only Carson stood between ACDC and oblivion. While his colleagues saw limited potential, Carson heard something revolutionary in those power chords and pounding drums. He fought against his own company to keep the band. When Malcolm Young received the news, he was furious. This wasn't just business. It was another attempt by industry suits to control their sound and future. After years of playing dive bars with broken equipment and sleeping on floors, this felt like the final insult. The timing was devastating. Despite their major label deal, ACDC was struggling. Malcolm and Angus often shared a single meal after shows to save money. Their amplifiers were held together with duct tape. Every night, they'd leave sweat and blood on stage. Yet their bank accounts remained empty. The band faced a life-changing choice: compromise their sound or risk everything. This collision of art and business would determine whether ACDC became rock legends or forgotten footnotes. Behind the scenes lurked the real problem: their contracts. The band had signed standard industry agreements without fully understanding the implications. These deals typically gave much of their publishing rights to third parties, with unfavorable terms that left artists with only a small percentage of the actual earnings their music generated. This publishing arrangement cost AC/DC significant income during their early career, money that could have transformed their lives and ended their financial struggles. Instead, they played larger venues while living like strugglers, a cruel irony that would fuel Malcolm's determination to never be exploited again. What happened in that Atlantic boardroom sparked a revolution in rock business. The near rejection burned something into Malcolm Young's mind that would change everything: a determination to seize control that would ultimately build one of music's greatest empires. But first, they'd have to learn the industry rules before they could break them. Malcolm Young sat in a hotel room in 1977, newspaper reviews scattered across the bed, his calloused fingers tracing their words. Critics dismissed ACDC as too loud, too raw, too unrefined. Music executives wanted them to soften their image. Radio programmers ignored their singles. Most bands would have caved under this pressure. Malcolm did the opposite, and it made ACDC millions. After the Atlantic Records betrayal, Malcolm developed a revolutionary approach to the business of rock music. His philosophy was captured in one phrase that defined their approach: total disregard for what Americans think. In an era when bands shape-shifted to chase radio hits, Malcolm's stance appeared to be financial suicide. The cost was immediate and painful. Radio stations locked them out of playlists. MTV executives demanded they soften their image to fit alongside the glam metal bands dominating airwaves. Record stores pushed back against their stark, aggressive album covers, relegating them to back shelves away from more commercial acts. But Malcolm recognized something the industry missed. Authenticity had long-term value that far outweighed short-term trends. His business instinct wasn't just stubborn artistic pride, it was strategic foresight that would outlast the disposable pop hits topping the charts. "We've always been a rock and roll band," Malcolm explained in interviews. "We didn't want to change because everyone else was getting into synthesizers or disco. We just stuck to what we do best." This philosophy was tested relentlessly throughout the 1980s. Bands like Bon Jovi and Aerosmith reached their commercial peaks with power ballads and radio-friendly hits. Even Ozzy Osbourne softened his approach. ACDC refused, shutting down any suggestion of recording a ballad or changing their distinctive sound. Their unwavering stance extended beyond music into every business decision. When lucrative commercial offers arrived, soft drink endorsements, movie soundtrack deals that required altering their sound, ACDC rejected them without hesitation. While competitors followed money in any form, ACDC built something more valuable: integrity as a brand asset. The band applied this approach methodically across their operation. Their jagged lightning bolt logo, created in 1977, remained unchanged decade after decade. Album covers maintained a consistent visual language. Their stage production focused on raw performance rather than the latest technology or effects. This wasn't laziness. It was strategic brand consistency before most musicians understood branding concepts. The true test came after Back in Black exploded commercially in 1980. Pressure mounted to evolve their sound to capitalize on mainstream success. Record executives pushed for radio-friendly singles with keyboards and synthesizers. Malcolm's response was to double down on their established sound. This consistency created an unexpected breakthrough in 1985. While other successful bands watched their popularity collapse when musical trends shifted, AC/DC's album Fly on the Wall still achieved platinum status despite mixed reviews. Their fans stayed loyal precisely because AC/DC hadn't chased temporary trends, the exact opposite of conventional industry wisdom. This approach transformed their merchandise into a perpetual revenue machine. While other bands redesigned logos and imagery with each album cycle, rendering previous merchandise obsolete, AC/DC's unchanging visual identity meant their products never went out of style. A t-shirt design from 1980 could sell just as well decades later, creating manufacturing efficiencies and higher profit margins than competitors who constantly retooled their merchandise lines. When hair metal collapsed under grunge in the early 1990s, dozens of once platinum bands vanished overnight. AC/DC simply continued being AC/DC, selling out arenas while their former chart competitors played clubs or disbanded entirely. Their commitment to authenticity had created something that transcended musical fads, a brand that weathered every industry storm. But creating a timeless sound was only the first step in building their empire. Now they needed to take that sound on the road in a way that would revolutionize touring itself. While most bands saw touring as a necessary evil to promote albums, Malcolm Young recognized it as the foundation of a financial empire. On a rain-soaked night in the late 1980s, as competing bands struggled with complex technical productions across town, AC/DC played to a packed arena with a simpler setup but twice the energy. This scene illustrated the genius behind AC/DC's touring strategy. While competitors invested heavily in elaborate stage productions, AC/DC discovered that focusing on their core strengths actually increased profits. Their approach revolutionized how bands could build wealth on the road. The standard arena rock show of the 1980s followed an expensive formula: Massive computerized lighting systems, hydraulic stages, and elaborate special effects dominated tours by bands like Van Halen and Kiss. These productions often required substantial investment to operate, with some shows barely breaking even despite sold-out crowds. ACDC took a different approach. They built their show around a few iconic elements. Angus Young's schoolboy uniform soaked with sweat as he duck-walked across stages, a massive bell lowered for Hell's Bells, and their stark logo backdrop. This focused production model reduced their costs while still delivering the intense, raw experience fans craved. The financial impact was significant. During their 1990 to 1991 Razor's Edge World Tour, ACDC grossed over $17 million with stronger profit margins than many of their peers. When competing bands needed high attendance just to cover costs, ACDC could perform profitably even in venues that weren't completely full, a crucial advantage during economic downturns or in weaker markets. Their ticket pricing also defied industry norms. Rather than maximizing short-term revenue with premium prices, ACDC kept tickets more accessible than many competitors. This strategy packed venues and built fierce loyalty, with fans often traveling to multiple shows on a single tour. Perhaps most innovative was their approach to tour routing. Malcolm Young recognized something other bands missed. Secondary markets were starving for major rock shows. While competitors fought over major city dates, ACDC routinely played places like Boise, Idaho, or Fargo, North Dakota. "We decided early on to go where other bands wouldn't," Malcolm explained in interviews. People in those cities were more grateful to see them, and they remembered that ACDC came when nobody else would. These overlooked markets became AC/DC's secret weapon. With no competition from other touring acts, they could sell out arenas in cities others ignored. Fans in these areas often drove hours and brought friends, creating higher merchandise sales per attendee than in saturated major markets. Their merchandising operation mirrored this efficient approach. The consistent imagery allowed for bulk production year after year, reducing per-unit costs. While other bands created entirely new merchandise for each tour, incurring design and setup expenses, ACDC's standardized products achieved economies of scale that boosted profit margins over industry averages. Behind the scenes, their touring contracts revealed Malcolm's growing business acumen. Learning from early exploitation, the band secured favorable terms that gave them a larger percentage of revenue than many of their contemporaries. This advantage, multiplied across millions in ticket sales, created a significant financial edge that compounded over decades. By focusing on efficiency over spectacle, consistency over trends, and underserved markets over major cities, ACDC built one of the most profitable touring operations in rock history. But even this finely tuned machine would face its ultimate test when tragedy struck at the height of their newfound success. February 19, 1980. Rain fell on London as news spread that would shatter ACDC's world and test their newfound business strategy. Bon Scott, the charismatic frontman whose gravelly voice had defined their sound, was found dead in a car after a night of heavy drinking. At 33 years old, he was gone. The band was devastated. Malcolm and Angus retreated to Australia, guitars untouched for weeks as they processed the loss of not just their singer, but a brother-in-arms who'd shared every step of their difficult journey. For many bands, this would have been the end, a tragic footnote in rock history. The timing couldn't have been worse. Highway to Hell had just broken through in America, giving them their first real success after years of struggle. After finally climbing the mountain, they'd lost the voice that got them there. Atlantic Records executives applied immediate pressure. "Find a new singer quickly," they pressed, "or watch your career die." Insurance premiums for future shows increased substantially. Venues threatened to cancel upcoming dates, demanding confirmation of the band's future. The financial pressure mounted as grief still hung heavy in the air. Malcolm approached this crisis differently than anyone expected. The same tragedy that had broken their hearts had created unexpected leverage. Atlantic Records needed ACDC now more than ever, with Highway to Hell selling thousands of copies daily. After years of being at a disadvantage in business negotiations, Malcolm recognized their moment to improve their position. The band approached Atlantic with a comprehensive plan to address the business issues that had affected them previously. After 7 years in the industry, Malcolm now understood what needed to change. His approach was firm, the necessary condition for ACDC's continuation. A key focus was securing better terms for their recordings and publishing going forward. In 1980, this represented a significant shift from their earlier arrangements. These changes would eventually prove enormously valuable as those recordings generated revenue through reissues, streaming, and licensing decades later. Malcolm also addressed their publishing arrangements to ensure that royalties would flow more directly to the band instead of being diluted through multiple parties. This corrected the structure that had left them touring extensively while their music made substantial money for others. Then came merchandise. Rather than licensing it out for quick cash as most bands did, Malcolm and Angus established a separate business entity that maintained control over their iconic imagery. This independent operation would generate significant income apart from their music sales, money that previously would have gone to outside companies. The executives were surprised. They had expected a band in mourning to accept any terms. Instead, they faced a group that had turned grief into resolve, determined to honor their fallen singer by ensuring their future work would never be exploited again. With business matters addressed, the band made their second critical decision, hiring Brian Johnson as vocalist. The combination of improved business positioning and perfect creative chemistry set the stage for what happened next. Back in Black was released on July 25, 1980. Its all-black cover a tribute to Bon Scott. The album became a commercial success beyond anyone's expectations, selling over 50 million copies worldwide. By October, just 3 months after release, it was platinum in the US and reached number 4 on Billboard, staying in the top 10 for 13 consecutive months. The financial impact was transformative. Their improved business arrangements meant ACDC received a greater share of revenue per album than under previous deals. This financial strength allowed them to tour extensively, further building their audience while generating additional revenue streams. What makes this transformation remarkable isn't just that ACDC survived a tragedy that would have destroyed most bands. It's that they emerged stronger, turning a potential career-ending disaster into the foundation of a multi-million-dollar empire. Their response to Scott's death represents one of the most impressive business pivots in rock history, significantly changing how they approached ownership and control of their work. Today, AC/DC's empire stands at hundreds of millions, with 200 million records sold worldwide. Their masterpiece, Back in Black, accounts for 50 million of those sales and ranks as the third best-selling album in American history, with 27 times platinum certification. A staggering achievement born from their darkest moment. Their genius wasn't just musical, it was their business approach that revolutionized the industry. By prioritizing artistic integrity over commercial pressure, maintaining strategic consistency while competitors chased trends, and improving control of their assets when others gave them away, AC/DC created a template that countless artists have since followed. Walk into any arena today, and you'll see their influence, not just in the music, but in how bands approach their business. Their insistence on better terms for their work, once considered unusual, is now standard advice for every new artist. Their strategic touring model has been adopted by bands across genres, from country to hip-hop. What's truly remarkable is how their catalog continues generating substantial revenue decades later, long after many of their contemporaries have faded into obscurity. The same songs that radio stations once refused to play now form the soundtrack for sporting events, movies, and commercials worldwide. A vindication of Malcolm Young's stubborn refusal to compromise their sound for short-term gain. ACDC's $380 million legacy isn't just about iconic riffs or memorable performances. It stands as a testament to artists who refused exploitation, fought for ownership, and built something permanent in an industry designed to take everything. Their journey from financial victims to business titans contains the most valuable lesson in rock history. Sometimes the path to greatest success is refusing to follow the established rules.